All right, so HBO just announced that there's going to be a prequel series to Game of Thrones, and it's going to be taking place over 1,000 years before the original events of the Game of Thrones series is currently taking place. So I'm really interested in this because it'll go back and it'll show a whole bunch of the lore and the ideas behind some of the things that happened, and we may learn about where the White Walkers came from, and we might learn about Azor Ahai, the prince who was promised, and we might learn about the Night King and where he came from. So that's when I thought this would be a good time to drop my fan theory about why I think the White Walkers might actually be the good guys. Okay, I know what you're thinking, but that's way off. Ever since the beginning of the series, we've been told the White Walkers were the enemies. We've seen them as being these terrible, horrible, undead monsters that are going to move south and attack all of Westeros. In fact, nearly all of the series has been if everyone in Westeros can just get together and put aside their differences, they can fight against a common enemy, whether it's Cersei, Tyrion, Jon Snow. And the whole point of the Night Watch was to try and keep all of these enemies from moving south. And the point of this whole giant wall was to keep them from coming south. It seems like they're the bad guys. So how could they possibly be the good guys? Well, in order to understand my theory, you're going to have to understand the theory about Bran possibly being the Night King. Now, I think this is important because it may be true. Aside from that, they kind of look alike in the TV series, there's a lot of evidence that says that what if Bran goes back in time and he wargs into the original person who becomes the Night King, and he becomes the Night King and gets stuck like that? Now, the idea sort of stops there, that he becomes the Night King and he, is confused or just becomes a force for evil because he's trapped in that body. But what if he isn't? What if he's actually cognizant of what he's doing? What if he knows that the White Walkers need to stop something terrible from happening? So the theory goes like this. Westeros is going to be destroyed by a giant volcanic eruption. Now, what's my evidence for this? Well, the author has clearly set up the idea that an entire continent can be destroyed by volcanic eruptions in something called the Doom of Valyria. It's been mentioned many times. If you saw the TV series, there's a point where Jormar and Tyrion are going through this steaming sea. They go through these ruins of Valyria. They see all these old ancient ruins, almost like an ancient Greek settlement that was destroyed, and they take a look at all of them, and Tyrion wonders when they're ever going to rebuild something on that scale. Well, that whole entire area was destroyed by a giant volcanic eruption. They actually believe this volcano might have been where these dragons used to live before they were tamed by the Targaryens, and that was what made Valyria one of the strongest powers in the world, because they had dragons that came from this volcano. But the downside of that is the volcano erupted, exploded, and everything was destroyed. So what evidence do we have that this will happen to Westeros? Well, is there a volcano in Westeros? The answer is yes. There actually is a volcano at Dragonstone. For those of you who are paying attention, this is where Daenerys was for some time. It's an ancient castle. It was owned by the Baratheons for a little while. And eventually, you see a meeting between Jon Snow and Daenerys there. They go into the caves. This is where we see a really interesting picture of the White Walkers etched onto the caves of Dragonstone. And this is where all that dragon glass is that can actually kill them. We know that they're weak against this one type of material. So it basically is obsidian, which is volcanic rock. So we know Dragonstone is a volcano, and it has been mentioned many times that it is sitting on an active volcano. That's also where the dragon glass came from, because it's volcanic glass or obsidian. So is it possible that Bran, in his time-traveling magical adventures, went into the future and saw that there's going to be a doom of Westeros? That is, this volcano is going to explode and destroy all of Westeros, just like it did to Valyria. He sees this and he realizes, wait a minute, what if I can prevent this? But how can I prevent this? Well, maybe he's already gone back in time and been Bran the Builder and he's built the wall. Now he's realizing, wait a minute, that was a bad idea. How can I stop the doom of Westeros? Well, I need to go back and become the Night King. So he intentionally goes back. He becomes the Night King. And he realizes that he can take a dragon with his freezing breath. I'm not sure if it's frozen breath or heat breath. It melted the ice, magic breath. And he can lead an army of these freezing cold White Walkers to the volcano and somehow extinguish it, thus preventing the doom of Westeros. So there's my theory. It's a little crazy. It's out there, but there's a lot of evidence that may say that this is true. If it is, I think it's really cool that this whole time we've been looking at this as one-sided, that it was the White Walkers were the bad guys and all these other people were the good guys. And if this is completely the opposite of what we've been believing, I think it would be a major swerve for George R.R. Martin, the author, to have put into this. Remember, it's a song of ice and fire. So we got to have some fire and we got to have some ice. We have White Walkers, we have a volcano, we have Jon Snow, we have Daenerys. We could see that these two things somehow magically came together to prevent a catastrophe that would have destroyed an entire kingdom, an entire culture, and an entire continent. So I think if that is the arc of Game of Thrones, that really these bad guys that we've been seeing this whole time are actually good guys, I think it's pretty cool. Well, anyways, that's my theory. Let me know what you think. You can comment on this. You can tell me you think this is a terrible idea or that you think there's some evidence against it. Or maybe I'm not paying as much attention and there is even more evidence that the White Walkers are actually the good guys trying to prevent a major catastrophe from occurring. And if that's the case, then we see a very different show than what we've been watching. But, hey, this is Game of Thrones. Anything can happen. So like and subscribe, and we'll talk more on this subject when the Game of Thrones series starts back up.